Welcome to the Destination Arte podcast. Our goal is to interview 20 creators in 2020. I'm David.
And I'm Mark, and we're building a community of people that can work together to achieve creative excellence.
Today's episode is about learning as an art student, and more specifically the question, how can I learn as an art student, which is why we have Bethany here, Bethany Baral. For those of you watching, she is obviously related to us. For those of you listening, her name gives it away. But Bethany, we're glad to have you. Tell us just a little bit about your experience with art and learning, and then we'll get into kind of, a little bit of an introductory before we start asking you some more specific questions.
Okay, sure. We all had a very creative upbringing with both of our parents being creatives. So I would say that we all collaborated on small creative things throughout our lives. When I went to college, I wasn't sure which creative avenue to take, and my dad pushed me towards graphic design. And I had no clue why. I hadn't done much with the computer, but he said, "You're a problem solver and you like to learn, and I think that this would be a great fit for your tendencies." So I got into that and realized very quickly that that was the path for me to at least start with. Graphic design was great. I loved that throughout the 4 years of my undergrad, and then when I graduated, I transitioned to studio art for my Master of Arts and then for my Master of Fine Arts. So there was some painting and drawing and sculpture, and then finally paper cut illustration for my Master of Fine Arts. During my master's years, I started teaching at the college, teaching graphic design on the freshman level and then sophomore level. And after I finished my MFA, I moved into full-time faculty. That's what I've been doing for the last year and a half, finishing my second year of full-time faculty now, teaching graphic design, I guess sophomore and up. I'm teaching some graphic design classes and then also a little bit of studio. Most recently taking on the Business for Art class that we offer the seniors. So that's been another step in my own learning and my own creative process. But yeah, that's where I'm kind of at right now.
Yeah, I thought that with you having a terminal degree in your field, you would be a good person to talk to, as well as having spent 7 years as an art student. And Mark is here in his fourth year of school. You've had some other art instruction beyond that, but I think that for me, something that made me aware of this idea is that I was just a different degree when I was an undergrad and in high school, and then I went back and I took animation classes, and that was when I realized that learning as an art student is very different from the typical classroom experience.
Because you did a lot of writing in your undergrad degree right before you went back to animation, which is different than...
Yeah, I guess that's close to an art student. I mean, it is an art, writing is an art, I guess. But I was just kind of thinking more of the basic classes, like your history classes. And
lecture-based.
Or if you're a business student, or if you're even in high school, you have an art hour, but all the other hours are Bible and history and math and science.
The answers are right or wrong.
Yeah, you're memorizing a lot of things, I feel like, for the tests. But Mark, did you have anything you wanted to kind of address about this idea of learning as an art student before we start asking Bethany the interview questions?
No, I think I'm really excited to ask her about it. I know that we have had a lot of conversations, just like not on the podcast, but Bethany and I have had a lot of conversations. I love learning from her about what she is learning about teaching art students, about what's the best way to educate, to learn as she continues to learn. I've loved seeing her grow in her skill set and in her life, like now doing freelance illustration as well as teaching. Like seeing her grow her skill set has just been amazing to watch, and I always love seeing what she's up to. So I definitely agree with you, David. I couldn't think of a better person to interview to ask about how to approach our education. And how we've kind of been doing it is we've been approaching these whole interviewing 20 creators in 2020 with the idea of we find a problem, like David said, where he's like, okay, I went back to animation class and now I have this problem of how do I learn as an art student rather than as a, what do they call it, a core classes a student. And so how do I learn that? And then we want to provide a resource and information about that. And so once again, I can't think of a better person to ask than Bethany Baral.
Yeah, is it Bethany B Creative? Are there periods in there?
BethanyB.creative, yeah, period. Yeah.
On Instagram. She is one of those accounts that when she posts, it's worth it.
Consistency is not my strong point.
But no,
Creativity.
you can see an example of just the fine art things that she does in some of her graphic design as well on there, and her hand lettering. So Bethany B. Creative, and we'll link that in the show notes and everything. But one of the first questions we wanted to ask is, what should my attitude be? So I'm sitting here and I'm a freshman, or I'm a senior in high school, and I'm going to study art, or I'm going to study graphic design, I'm going to study maybe even music, whatever that art is that you're studying. What should my attitude be when I begin art? We have school classes, online lessons, courses, things like that. How should we approach that from an attitude perspective?
I think that one of the things that a lot of the art students are surprised by and then also delighted by is the amount of conversation that you're going to have in your classroom. This is no longer a lecture. This is not even high school, where it's like we're calling on you to answer a lot of questions. There is a time for lecture, or a time for what we call demoing, which is demonstration, right? But we're demoing what we're going to do, and then we walk around and the students do that themselves, and we check in with them and see how they're doing. And there's a lot of one-on-one conversation there. And what has to come to any relationship, any conversation, student-teacher, however that is, whatever relationship that is humility. And so there's a point of kind of, I don't know if surrender is the word, but humbling yourself and coming to the semester, to the school year, with the idea that the information you have may be incomplete or inaccurate. And being willing to analyze the information you have against what they're telling you, or to add to your information what they're telling you. I've been to a couple conferences, and one of the conferences I went to, the first session was something I had heard before. I had heard the whole thing before, and I immediately shut down and was like, well, I've heard all this before. And sure enough, I only learned one more thing that day. But then I was listening to some of my friends talk about it, and they were talking about, and I hadn't thought of this in this way. I was humbled at that point. Like I could have gotten a lot more out of that if I had been willing to continue to analyze the information that's being given to me, and consider that my information may be incorrect or incomplete. So I would say that humbling yourself and being willing to take on another perspective, and obviously that can hit dangerous levels, right, where you're just constantly second guessing the knowledge that you have. And so there is a point where if something can be based in scripture, if a principle can be aligned with scripture, that wouldn't be something that you would question. But if it is a technique or a preference or something like that, it would be beneficial to you to take a step back and try something new. And I think some personalities especially get really stuck in the way that we do things, or in the preference that we have, right? And so it does take a humble person and a flexible person to be open to whatever the new medium is or whatever the new process is.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. I know one thing that really resonated with me when you said that was, you're sitting in a place and you think, oh man, I've heard this before, I love how you approach that attitude where you're start looking for overlapping information. If you have one professional telling you the same thing as another professional, the same thing as your teacher, that can serve as confirmation for you. And rather than being, this is boring or this is not, just get excited, because that means you have heard the correct thing before this. That's one thing that I love hearing professionals speak, especially at the program that I attend, PCC, because when we have professionals come in, or whenever I'm able to hear professionals, they say the same things that our faculty are saying. And that's a point to not be like, oh, well, that was a waste of time. No, that means I got the correct information. So I definitely love that attitude that you proposed of coming in with that humble spirit.
I think the other thing would be to let go of any expectations you have of what you're going to learn. Oh. Anytime you go into a class, just be open to anything that they would tell you, because a lot of times you take away from an event or from a class what you were looking for, right? Mm-hmm. So if you are just completely open to whatever they will tell you, that can make any class beneficial. So your English class suddenly becomes, a place where you actually are taking in information, and you're creative classes are places now where you're taking in whatever they can give you instead of looking for that technique that you are wanting or looking for something really specific.
That's good. Yeah. I should just let you guys just talk and I'll just...
You're good, go for it.
Well, the question I have now is, so now that I've come in with an attitude to learn, how do I, besides getting an A, what are the keys to seeing myself improve over the course of a semester? Because no one wants to start any study and finish it the same way. But with art, is there something specific that has to be done in order for at the end of the semester, regardless of whether you got A's or C's, for you to be able to say, okay, I saw success, I saw improvement, I'm in a different place now?
Yeah. So I would not say that I'm an educator yet. I've only been in this for like 5 years, so I'm just like brushing the surface of being an educator. So what I'm trying to be more purposeful with, I'm trying to be more purposeful in presenting the goals of each project to my students and letting them know what I want them to carry over from the last project to the next. Because I'm thinking very specifically of graphic design class right now, where we have goals and principles that we want them to apply. We move on to the next project, and those that now are focused on the new goal and have not kept the old goal, carried that over into the new project, those students are they're missing it. They're too narrow-minded. So keeping in mind that whatever you learned initially has to be carried into every project. So you start with drawing class and you learn how to draw, and then you move into illustration class. And if you let go of all of the drawing knowledge that you have and you just move into shading and you know what I mean, you don't have a great illustration because you don't have a great drawing. So just in graphic design, we went over grid and hierarchy in their magazine design, and now we're moving into an infographic. And if they leave behind grid and hierarchy and focus on iFlow, they're going to have a hard time doing that because you have to have hierarchy for iFlow. And they're going to really struggle with accomplishing the goals if they don't bring the old goals in. So I think that can be one thing is if you don't know what the goal is as a student, ask. And if your instructor doesn't know, it's okay. It's probably because they're a great artist that is not thinking through like what are the specific goals, and that'll be a chance for them to narrow in on what they want you to learn specifically. But if you don't know what the goals are, ask. And that way you'll know whether or not you've accomplished something. Even if you don't get an A, you'll know whether or not you understand a concept better or whether you've reached a goal. I'm very goal-oriented, obviously, so.
No, that's super helpful. I love that idea of trying to determine what the goal is to begin with, because that gives you like a target, to shoot for. It's like, you have a bow and arrow and you're just kind of looking at a field. You're like, well, it'd be nice
it's not just distance,
right.
It's accuracy.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Do you have anything to add, David?
Well, I kind of have a high-level question that we didn't prepare you for, but as a follow-up to that one, I think it's easy to tell when art is bad, and it's a little bit more difficult to tell when art is great. But how do I know when my art is moving from, what I started with to, good? Like, is there a barometer, or is it just people will tell me?
Yeah, I think when you start receiving unsolicited compliments, you're moving towards great. Judge the complimenter and see whether or not they are someone that would know good art. Okay, so that was a side point. Hold on. What did you say? You said...
How do I tell when I'm...
How do you tell when you're getting better? Yeah, so definitely don't dwell on your old work. There's... we're going to talk about being a creative and a critic, so I don't want to jump there too soon. But don't dwell on your old work and keep referencing it while you are creating. But there's a time to step back and evaluate whether or not you're improving. And so if you know what the goals are, if you're in class, then you can evaluate whether or not you're reaching goals, right? Also looking back at your old work and comparing it with your current work should be a good barometer for you. But if you can't tell, like I cannot tell if this is stronger, then figure out what the principles are. If it's drawing and accuracy, if it's emotion and storytelling, what is it that you're improving on? And be encouraged by the the piece that you're improving on and realize that you're still adding to that, right? And then I would say, if you are trying to draw something specific, or if you're illustrating, make sure that you have references, and not necessarily like references that you're drawing from specifically, but you have inspiration. So make sure you have at least 10 different artists so that you're not stealing from one specific person's style, right? But reference those other artists and work from them, keep them in front of you. And that was not something I did until grad school, where we had a place, like an actual studio space that we worked in consistently, and I was able to hang things on the wall. That allowed me to be able to continually look up and reference and solve problems that I couldn't solve in my own brain, to look up and see how the artists that I wanted to emulate were solving those problems. And Mr. Brian Jekyll taught me that in painting. My very first painting class in grad school, I was working on a landscape, and he pulled out like 10 landscape books and started flipping through and showing me specific landscapes. I was like, see how they implied this, see how they solved this problem? And I was like, oh, okay, great. So I don't have to just come up with this on my own. And that allows me to be able to continue to judge whether or not I'm moving in the direction I want to be moving. So then if I hang my work with those 10 pieces and it fits into that same category, or has that same, whether it's the emotion or the color scheme or whatever it is you're trying to do, then you'll know whether or not you've succeeded.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to having good taste. So, if you have good taste, then you will put good things on your wall. You will have a good inspiration to look to, and maybe like you said, I love what you said about like placing your image next to all the other images. That's spot on. And maybe take your old image from 6 months ago and put it on the wall next to all those, and then that can help you gauge, oh wow, like say you have an animation, put it next to the Disney movies that are coming out, and then work for 6 months and then put it up next to, again, comparison, because I will say it is very hard sometimes to compare like two pieces. So like if I'm working and I have, and that is one of the tricky things I think about a semester, is you're focusing so much on learning, maybe only accomplishing 3 projects a semester or 4 projects. So what I've strived to do is like say take summers and try to do a little bit more volume, and then place those around, and then you'll be able to gauge, okay, I can see from here to here, here's what I've done. Right. That's huge. That was a game changer for me, and I think it was you that was telling me to, like, you need to have stuff that's up there next to what you're working on so that you can see how it matches up, and that was a game changer.
Yeah, and again, in a semester you're doing 4 projects.
Yeah.
You're not going to make massive strides of improvement in 4 projects. You're going to make massive strides of improvement after 50 projects. Mm-hmm. So if you compare your first and your fourth and you don't see a big improvement, please don't be discouraged. Please keep drawing or designing or whatever it is. If you're pairing typefaces, keep doing it. And then on your 50th one, compare that to your first one and see how those are matching up.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Because you have 4 finished things. You can't, you have 4 days of basketball practice. You can't.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You're like, I'm not Michael Jordan. This is the worst.
Right. But the 50 or the however many 500 shots that you shoot over the summer before you come to practice, you improve and you see how your shots are more consistent.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Me trying to use sports analogies. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, don't tell your boyfriend or anything. Well, hopefully he won't. Well, hopefully he will listen. We'd like for people to listen, but maybe he'll be kind to you, I'm sure. Yeah. He's a great guy. Shout out Bethany's boyfriend. Okay, so the thing you wanted to talk about, well, the last question we have for you is how to separate the creative versus the critic. I know this is something maybe just we as a family struggle with, but others could definitely benefit from it. But how do you, as you, like you say, working on those 4 projects, separate the creative from the critic and balance being too hard on yourself, but also enjoying what you've created?
Right. I don't think there's like a formula. I don't think I have a magic.
Man.
I know.
Can you talk through what the creative and the critic is? Because it's something that I when I heard you explain it to me for the first time, I was like, this needs to go on the podcast so that more
Yes,
people.
please explain that.
So last semester in graphic design 1, my students were working on their projects, and I'd put them up on the board, and I had been reading from Frank Camaro's Shape of Design book, and something that he said had stirred this idea in me. Maybe I'm ripping this off of him completely. Who knows? Mark, Creative and Critic, is that in Shape of Design?
I do not know specifically, but if you are ripping him off, you're crediting him. So I think we're safe.
So
Frank Jamero, Shape of Design.
Great author. Okay. So the Creative and the Critic, the students need to spend a good amount of time being creative and protecting baby ideas, right? So realize that every little creative idea you have, every little drawing, I think maybe these colors will go together. These are little infant baby ideas that can't find their own way in the world, and you have to protect them, and you can't let either your people, like say your negative voice or your inner voice, kill that idea, and you can't let other people walk by and see your sketchbook and be like, that's a terrible drawing, right? And you can't let your fear of what other people are going to think of you kill an idea before it's actually had a chance to grow. So then you go ahead and you try those colors together, you pair these typefaces together, and sometimes it's just like the contrast wasn't strong enough. And so you have time to refine before you completely discard a story idea, poetry, anything, the color palette, anything. And so you have to give your ideas time to grow, and I think that's the part of being a creative. So you have an idea, and then you have to continue to cultivate that idea. Students that sit down and are like, I have a total vision for my whole project. I'm like, that is so great. Total, like complete vision, like you can see every bit of detail in it. I want to see some sketches, and I want to see some roughs then, and I want to see your color palette choices, because actually what you have is an idea, and you think you're seeing a whole picture, and there probably are some people out there that can see like the finished painting and they know, and I'm not discrediting them. But I want you to spend time cultivating your idea and being the creative, and then once you've done that, you step back and you approach it from the critic perspective. And realizing that you are your own worst critic, right? That's always the way it is. Unless, I don't know. Okay, never mind. We won't say that. Moving on. So I started tacking my designers' projects to the board when they were in their rough stage. So it wasn't even actually like at a finished stage. It was at a rough. So they had time to develop it, and then we put it up there before it was finished. And I had them comment on each other's work. Or I would ask them the questions, the goals from the project, and then put tallies next to the ones that received, like that they thought were achieving that goal. And then I would come in and step in and direct a little bit at the end of that conversation. But I asked them to let go of the pride of the creative, the defensiveness of the creative, because that's something that you cultivated, that you've worked on, it was your idea, and so you're very defensive of that. Let that go, and you have to switch to your other personality, which is the critic, and you are going to assess it through honest eyes. One of my fellow faculty members uses, if you were going to buy this logo, would you actually buy this logo? If you were paying for a logo, would this be something you'd buy? And she uses that to get her students to start thinking like the client then, and then also the creative. So I think that's the other way to look at it too. But I think you need to realize that the time spent being the creative and the critic are somewhat proportional and should probably both happen every day. If you find that you are spending long days being a critic, you are falling into a critical mindset, and you are not actually allowing for creativity, because the creativity is that openness that anything can happen, any idea could turn into something, and there's a positivity to creativity, and then there's a negativity to criticism. So finding the balance of those things, and like that's the key word of my life right now, balance. I'm like this pendulum that's like I'm like trying to find my middle, okay? And I think that the creative personality has to swing back and forth a little bit from positivity to negativity in that creative and criticism. All right, I've said the same thing like 7 different ways. Right. Feel free.
No, I think what I'm gathering here is you start with humility, and then you just don't get discouraged as you're going throughout the the process, because it is only 3 or 4 projects. And I think if you start with that humility and you stay encouraged, then you will be able to start to find that balance, because you'll be humble, right? And you'll be acknowledging of your shortcomings, but you'll also be saying, the reason I'm here is to learn and grow. And I'm sure you've probably experienced that in your journey as an art student.
Yeah, it is really tricky, because in design class and art class, they're teaching you all of these things of the correct ways to do things. So all of a sudden, you begin critiquing everything. You look at signs in the stores, billboards. You look at paintings online, everything. You now have the ability to tell what's good, what's bad, and all of a sudden now you're critiquing, and that carries over. That can make you, first of all, a negative person to be around if all you're doing is critiquing things, but or it can also make you a bad art student, because you're just sitting there going, I'll never be good, I'll never make it, this work is terrible, or my classmates' work is terrible. Then you're terrible to be around in the classroom. But I've found that the creative tends to make a lot of problems, like they tend to create a lot of problems, and then your critic is someone who solves all the problems, or at least points them out to you. And it is strange as creatives. We are people who spend our entire lives making up problems for us to solve, as if we don't have enough problems already. We're like, let's make some more. And then, our critic has to come in and be like, it's like the Awkward Yeti, like cartoons where you have the head, the brain, and the heart. And the creative is kind of that heart, like, oh my goodness, this could be anything. And then the brain is like, yeah, but I don't know if we can do that quite yet. So I think that I love what you said about separating those two, making sure that maybe both of them show up in the day. Like that, I had not considered that before, and I think I'm going to try to start implementing that into my process, like allowing time, maybe figure out what I know Jake Parker talks about, like figuring out what your best creative time is, So maybe in the morning, if that's like your most creative time, then you have that, and then maybe you say, that's my creativity time, and then you say if it's for the other time, it's not. So
yeah. And I think that people don't always want to be the critic. If you don't have the critic, you don't have what we call the design eye or the artistic eye. We were raised being shown what was accurate art, what was good art, and like mom would draw next to you and you could see your work wasn't the same as hers, or something like that. And so we were really blessed to be raised with the artistic eye and the critical eye. Some people, I would say, don't have that as naturally. They aren't as natural with that. And you'll see those very optimistic people in the art lab. They're optimistic and they're full of life and they're brimming with ideas. Their critic isn't weeding out those ideas, so they're stretched pretty thin. Yeah. Their critic isn't telling them where their drawing is off, so they get a finished painting that has a terrible drawing underneath. They're not actually cultivating that critic as well. So I think you need to realize which is your natural strength or your personality tendency, and make sure that you're cultivating the other. I swing back and forth. I'm a melancholy, so the critic is strong in me, but also the creative is strong in me. So I have to spend some time making sure that both of those are balanced. But I would say that others are more critical by nature and others are more positive and creative by nature.
Awesome. Well, we're really glad that you came to be on the podcast. We have wanted to have you on for a while, and we finally found a reason to.
Or we got up the courage to ask.
Yeah,
I think
we found a format that we would feel comfortable. But we should have you on more, because I could listen to you. I would just like to have a podcast with you guys. If you wanted to start a podcast, just let me edit it. That would be great. So, but no, thank you very much. BethanyB.creative on Instagram if you want to see her work or connect with her if you have questions about what she said. Sure, she'd love to encourage people who are art students who maybe don't feel like they're capable, or feel like they've hit that point where their critic is ruling their world, because I know we all can get to that point where...
Right. Realize that doubt is part of the creative process. Sorry, I'm interjecting again. Doubt is part of the creative process, and you'll see that quote around. That's the critic part. Don't let him rule for too long. Move him to the side and take back over as the creative. And then also, if you're stuck, you're one small adjustment from making something work, making the next step. Yeah. So seek out that information and get just the next baby step that you need.
Perfect. Well, we are on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a review if you liked it. DestinationRTA.com is where they can find.
Launch. A new page comes out every... They're called chapters. We release a new page every Wednesday, and that's going to go on for a while. So if you want to keep up with our Carrot Vince and his journey in the military, you can
The
follow
most
him.
inspiring carrot I've ever met.
Yeah. I told David, I think the other day, that one of our other guests, Lori Lou Jones, was reading it and sending them to her mom every week, and that was a big encouragement to me. And so Patrick and I are still working on it. We're still creating more panels for it, and we're looking forward to just keeping them coming every Wednesday. So
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for listening. This is our 4th creator of our 20 and 2020, and we've got more coming. So Bethany, once again, thanks for being here, and we'll see everybody next episode.